It's a nice morning. It's Father's Day. Father's Day breakfast 2012.
He doesn't say anything to you. He just starts it off. And,
well, I mean, he's been doing it.
Oh, I know. He's a big star.
Big star.
Big ego.
Fish. Big fish and little
Oh, we taped it in March.
What about Vanna White? Is she flustered?
Yeah, she's better than him because she went and introduced herself to all of us beforehand, and
you know what it is?
just small talk and stuff like that.
He probably saves it for the eight.
Yeah, I guess that's it.
And if you did 20 a day,
now he's going to go for the queen.
Jaded, wouldn't you?
What was the theme?
Honeymoon week. Yeah, I was there with my wife.
So what was the word?
For the final one?
Yeah.
In a hurry.
Conquering things that people think.
But he kept making fun jokes and stalling, and Pat Sajak said, "Come on, you're kidding. You know what it is."
How was he in person? Yeah, well, because he's on it.
He's a funny guy. He's a funny guy. Did he feed you? Yeah, he got some food. I mean, it's kind of like a it's in LA. It's kind of neat because when you're there, they have like 2 people for everyone. Like they have one person for makeup, another person to keep you excited. So they say, "Don't forget the clap."
So, are you writing a book about your experience?
I don't think anyone would want to read it.
Now you're a celebrity. You're like up there with the Kardashians.
Oh, right.
What you have to do is you have to do something vulgar or something.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I could use the money to donate it to some satanic.
Help the guy who got his face cut off. Go there.
Ooh.
Actually, that would be.
You blind? Or how do you do that?
Channel 10 had a little link that said try out for the show, click here, and so we got called in, and then when we went there, we beat all the other teams. And
Really? Why don't you try Jeopardy now?
That's a little harder, but I mean.
So you'll take your chances.
Yeah, maybe I will. It's fun. So then, when we beat all the other teams, at Wheel of Fortune, they would put words up there, and you have to like buzz in, and
Did you cheat? Did you have like a little computer?
Yeah, that's what they spend half the morning warning you about. Like
no cheating.
Well, they say if we see you looking in the audience, and if we think you're spinning the wheel funny,
You're right.
then you're out. Like there's no like you sign contracts.
Don't fuck around.
Right, exactly. If you look like you're messing around, you're
Do people do that?
I guess they have.
Did you take it seriously, or did you do it for the fun of it?
More for the experience.
Did the other people act the same way? Were they competitive, or just there to have fun?
They were competitive. They just made stupid comments.
Oh my God.
Like one was Superman and Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
And the guy said Superman and Spider Woman.
Oh man.
Yeah, and we were all like amazed because who's heard of Spider Woman?
There is a Spider Woman.
I know, it's just a ridiculous. He was nervous. Exactly.
And there was another faux pas too.
Oh yeah, one was doing the tango, and he said doing
the bongo.
Doing the bongo, doing the Congo.
It's funny, isn't it?
It was funny. It was funny, but.
Good that he did that.
Oh yeah, good for us because they ended up with 2,000.
A lot of bankruptcies in that show. He was bankrupt, and I was screaming and cussing.
Why are they bankrupt?
Well, because when you spin the wheel, if it lands on bankrupt.
Oh, I don't know the game.
Yeah, you have to spin the wheel, and whatever it lands on, you get that amount of money times the letters you guess.
Yeah.
So if it lands on 2,000 and you guess 4 M's, you get 2,000 $.
There was a watch.
Well, the biggest on the wheel is 5,000.
There was a watch party, and Channel 10's Janine Stanwood covered it. She wrote courageous with the consonants and vicious with the vowels.
Didn't I see you in public?
Good morning, everybody.
And then Lori didn't like.
Good morning, everybody.
Haba haba.
You're my boss.
Good morning, Don.
Good morning. There you go. And for those of us that no longer have our fathers here, only in our heart, we should remember our fathers, including my own, and enjoy your time with your parents, like I do with my mother, and it's a good thing. It's a blessing. A couple of announcements regarding events we have for the summer and other events. First of all, I want to thank everybody that helped in the kitchen this morning. You know who you are. You don't have to stand up. Again, my mother, my brother, who's already come and gone, headed back to DeLand, Don, Shirley, Bill, and Alan, and all those people that came in this morning. I appreciate your help. And I hope
I'll spend the rest of my life explaining why I'm in that department. We're a combination of sociology, anthropology, and geography. We merged several years ago. I suggested we just simply be the Department of Sociology, Anthropology, and Geography, but that wasn't fancy enough, so I was outvoted. It was close. We won with about 48%. It's like 5:15 on a Friday afternoon where people are ready to go home and then vote for anything. Palestinians were going to start questioning their loyalty to Islam or to the Palestinian political position. So it's a secret that nobody wants to talk about. Both sides are afraid to bring it up. But it's there, and there's some literature on it. But anyway, the secret Jews of Spain, how many converted, how many went into exile, the numbers will vary according to the author. Generally speaking, the attitude is that probably 100 to 200,000 converted to Catholicism in Spain or Portugal, and that about 200,000 went into exile. Now those who went into exile mostly went to North Africa and especially to the Ottoman Empire, which of course was the Muslim stronghold, centered in Istanbul, Turkey. And I lived in Turkey for a year and a half, enjoyed it very much. Went to Smith Times, as we were talking about earlier here with the gentleman. And so when the Jews were kicked out of Spain, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, the head of the Muslim world at that time, welcomed the Spanish exiles and sort of made fun of Ferdinand and Isabel, famous ones, those are the ones who exiled us, and with the Inquisition, and made fun for kicking out many of the best people of Spain. Because at the very time that the Western world, the Atlantic world, was beginning to enter into the great empires, Portugal, Spain, France, Britain, those great, and the Dutch that made great empires in the Western world and Africa, with a lot of negative consequences also, of course. But at the very time, that very time, a lot of the navigators were Jewish, or at least secretly Jewish. A lot of the advisors, the economic advisors to the kings and queens were Jewish. So the Sultan of Turkey welcomed these people and just couldn't understand how the king and queen of Spain could kick these people out. But he welcomed them. So the largest number of the exiles who were kicked out of Spain and Portugal went to North Africa and on into the Ottoman Empire. Some went to Protestant areas of Europe, like Amsterdam, Holland, which welcomed the Jews. Some of them did come to the West, and if they came to a Spanish or Portuguese colony, then they had to be secret Jews, because the Inquisition was still there. If they came to a British or Dutch colony, that they could come out openly as Jews. So in some of the Caribbean areas they could be open, in some of the Caribbean areas they couldn't. Brazil, of course, for a short time was Portuguese, and then it became Dutch. So during the Dutch time, Jews went open, in the open in Brazil. Then when the Portuguese reconquered Brazil, the Inquisition went to Brazil, and so the Jews had to go into hiding or go into exile. That was the settlement of New York City, New Amsterdam at that time, the first Jewish settlement in the United States, 1654, considered the beginning, and that was refugees from Brazil, Sephardic refugees from Brazil. Descendants of secret Jews in any country in the world. There are several articles in the journals here. Brazil's got a lot of coverage. I have an article on Brazil last year, I think it was, and we have 2 or 3 members of the staff who closely identify with the journal who work on talking about Brazil. But Brazil probably has the largest number of secret Jews for 2 reasons. First of all, Brazil is the 5th largest country in the world, population-wise. And secondly, of course, it was largely colonized by the Portuguese. And generally, it was a lot of the crypto Jews who were trying to get out of Spain or Portugal as much as they could, as fast as they could. So a good percentage of the people who left Spain and Portugal were Jewish because they were trying to get out. Now some of them, after being on the ocean for a while, decided that they had enough waves and didn't want, 2 months of going up and down on ships that they weren't that sure about, and not even knowing what the condition was when they got to wherever they were planning to go. So a lot of them got all the various islands along the route. So the Canary Islands, the Madeira, all of these islands, even Puerto Rico, Cuba had a large number of secret Jews in the early years of the settlement in Cuba. And so many of them would just get off at the closest island because they decided they didn't want that long trip over the Atlantic Ocean. And so many of these islands, if anyone says that they have ancestors from the Canary Islands, pretty good possibility they have Jewish ancestors because that was one of the hot spots. And the various islands like that. We also sort of assumed that most of the secret Jews came that route, came to the Americas, the New World. Either continuing as secret Jews, as I mentioned, or coming out of a few places. But also, some of the Sephardim who were exiled from Spain and Portugal went to the east and joined the Ashkenazi community in Poland. Because the Jews in Poland, in Eastern Europe, whom most of you descended from, I would assume, had one of the highest birth rates ever recorded in the world.
All right.
After all, think about it. What can you do on a cold night in Poland?
Yeah, procreate.
No television, no internet, no movies, no heat. You go to bed and you snuggle. And then little babies from snuggling. And so Poland had one of the largest recorded birth rates, the Ashkenazi communities. So just at the time that the areas where the Sephardim were living started slowing down because they were out of the routes of the new shipping routes and all of that, because the depth of the water, the depth of the ports had a lot to do with that. And so in that very same time, Eastern Europe had invited the Jews to come in. So Ashkenazim basically have a rectangular migration from Israel west to Rome, southern Italy, north up the Italian peninsula to the Rhineland, Germany and France, and then back east in a straight line back to Poland. So Ashkenazi migration is basically a 3-sided triangle: Israel, Italy, Rhineland, Poland. 3-sided triangle. The Sephardim migration is very different. And if you use Mizrahim, which would include the Jews of Iran and Iraq, Mizrahim simply means Eastern Jews, and would include generally the Jews of North Africa, as well as Iraq and Iran. And they generally are put together with the Sephardim. The Sephardic migration pattern is very different. Starting in 586 BCE to what is today Babylonia, the Syrian conquering of Israel and all of this, and then also coming west to Italy and then going up into Spain and Portugal. And so the Sephardic migration is very different and was much more mixed in terms of marriages along big patterns from all the way from Iraq to Spain. That's why Ashkenazi, most of the so-called Jewish diseases are generally Ashkenazi, because the geneticists say that any 2 Ashkenazi Jews anywhere in the world are no more than the equivalent of 5th cousins removed from each other. And that's why it's mostly Ashkenazi that had the Jewish diseases, because there was so much marrying within a group. So at approximately 1200, 1300, that time period, where most of the Jews in the world are still Sephardic or Mizrahim, in the use of larger definition, a group of probably between 25 and 50,000 Ashkenazim in the Rhineland. By 1880s were 7-8 million people, all in that little group of 25 to 50,000 people. So that's why the genetic thing is there. If you get a mutation, it spreads rapidly if it's a lot of intermarriage like that. The Sephardim were very different. So the Sephardim left because of this treatment. As I say, many of them stayed and converted to Catholicism, and many of them went into exile. Now, what about those who stayed? I've been talking about the exile more, but what about those who stayed in Spain and Portugal? Many of them, of course, were secret Jews, Marranos, hiding out, openly Jewish, openly Catholic, but still secretly practicing Judaism. If they got caught, there usually would be an auto de fe, which is a fire, death by fire. Even though there's also, let me clarify this, that most of those who faced an auto de fe were not killed. The number who were actually killed, burned alive, was actually very small. Because even most of those who underwent an auto de fe did not actually burn to death and be killed, but that was far out. But many of them also remained secretly Jewish for a while, but after 100 years or so, it was hard to maintain that. There were no books, there were no rabbis, and so many of them eventually did get absorbed into the Christian community. Maybe I should open it to questions here. I've sort of given an overview. Now, let me make one more point, however. DNA, of course, is coming in. And that's how I can show that, my closest match in the world, are actually with the secret Jews of Mallorca. But DNA, there was a DNA study that was published in December of 2008, based on male DNA of 1,140 men in Iberia, 700 and something from Spain, 200 and something from Portugal, some from the islands, Mallorca, the islands on the east coast of Spain. And 20% of all men in Spain today, all Catholic basically today, 20% are genetically Jewish. Now, some people argue that, well, some of that might be the Phoenicians who were in Spain long before the Jews, and they have a similar Semitic DNA. And so the skeptics will say that some of that 20% might be Phoenician, and we grant that that is true. But the general opinion still is that the figure is probably close to 20% are actually genetically Jewish. 10% are genetically Arab or Berber, from Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia. So if you go into a typical Spanish-speaking Catholic church in Dade County, now it's different if it's Mexican or Central American, because there you would have more Native American ancestry. Even though if you do in the male gene, the typical pattern for mestizos, my roommate's mestizo, my two closest friends is from Peru, mestizo from Peru, and one of my two closest friends is my Palestinian friend from Gaza. But we have very interesting conversations. And we're in that 80% who want peace, trying to work together so we can both live together with an Israeli state, a Jewish state, and a Palestinian state. I'm a Zionist. I support Israel, but I also believe that Palestinians are entitled to a state too. But anyway, if you go into a Catholic church where it's not Mexican or Central American ancestry, which would bring down the Jewish percentage because there would be more Native American ancestry, even though, again, that's supposed to be on the female line, not on the male line. But a typical Spanish-speaking Catholic church in Dade County, 30% of the people in that church are either genetically Jewish or Arab. Interesting work. Cuba would probably least that, because a lot of the early settlers in Cuba were secret Jews. That was one of the hot spots, because it was Havana was one of the major trading cities. So
the Sephardim and the Babylonian exile.
Yeah, the question is what I said about a link between the Sephardim and the Babylonian exile. What I was saying is that, in a general sense, all of us are divided into either Ashkenazi or Sephardic. However, technically Sephardic means anybody who's not Ashkenazi. To get to the bottom. The shorthand definition. So Sephardim also include Mizrahim. Mizrahim, which means in Hebrew Eastern, it would include the Jews from the Eastern world, which includes Babylonia, which would be Iraq and Iran today. So, of course, the Jewish communities in Iraq and Iran go back over 2,500 years. to the first exile, 586 BCE. And so most of those Jews, if any of you happened to be at Beth Am last week when they had a movie on the Jews of Iran, ironically, my graduate assistant is a Muslim from Iran, and my undergraduate assistant by my choice is my friend who's a Muslim from Gaza. But that movie last week showed it's interesting, when you get away from the Middle East and you talk to Sephardim, recognizing that our ancestors were living with Muslims, when the Ashkenazi ancestors were living with Christians, it's a whole different world perspective. And if you can detach yourself from what's currently going on between Israel and Palestine, it's interesting how, and it was shown in this movie last week on Iranian Jews, they frequently talked about Muslim friends, and it was just typical, it was common. The same thing you might talk about your Christian friends today. They talk about their Muslim friends back in Iran, because that's been the tie. And so all of these Sephardim lived in Muslim countries, basically, whether it was Spain and Portugal, or whether it was North Africa, or whether it was the Ottoman Empire, Turkey. And then, of course, today, Iraq and Iran, even though, of course, the Jews were living in Iraq and Iran long before the Prophet Muhammad started the message of Islam. But when I say that there's a tie between the Sephardim and the Babylonian Jews, Iraq and Iran, that area, what I really mean is that all the non-Ashkenazim are put together as Sephardic, but Sephardic are really divided into two subgroups, the Spanish-Portuguese Sephardim and the Sephardim who really are also called Mizrahim from Iraq and Iran and that part of the world. Yeah. As he mentioned, some of the Jews who were taken into Babylonia returned, of course, in some state. And there was also, those who stayed were the Mizrahim, who would be under the subcategory of Sephardim today. And so that's the connection. There are also those more than that. The language, the Hebrew spoken, also tends to be different. And there was also a lot of back and forth movement all the way from Iraq and Iran to Spain. That was in one circuit of travel. A lot of travel, rabbis traveled back and forth. So it's more than they just are under the same name. There also was a fair amount of actual real communication all the way on that route from Iraq and Iran all the way to Spain.
Can you clarify the connection between, in 1492, between the expulsion and Columbus and the latest research on Columbus and Judaism?
Yeah, I spoke to some of your Presidente 2 years ago on the Jewish ancestry of Spain. But anyway, there's nothing new on the research. The general attitude, I've given a talk, one or two talks.
And understand, because I've often been thrown at, when did you get converted? I'm not a converted Uncle Ben Rice. I've always said that. And my children, I had to put them in hiding when we got here, when they were born here, because I thought we were going to have the same encounter. And my children know who they are, we know who they are, and the other generations behind us, I hope to continue to live on. And may you continually be saying what you're saying and continually be blessed.
Okay, thank you.
Amen.
Brazil originally.
Brazilian, I'm born in Jamaica, but Brazilian Jews.
By the way, this copy, volume 4 of the journal, this is a picture of it. This is volume 3 for him. I'm sorry for my Spanish mixed in, that's the way I talk. My kids spoke only Spanish when they came to the United States. My roommate speaks only Spanish, learning English now, so I speak Spanish half of my life. And so when I go out in public, a lot of Spanish is mixed in. But this is the journal. Volume 4, which is stays at the printer, is going to have an article on exactly what she's talking about. One of the articles about black Jewish women in Brazil. Exactly what she's talking about. And also, let me mention another thing too. what is the reception of crypto Jews returning? Now, I understand you have a fair number of people here. My synagogue, Temple Baptist, a small synagogue on Southwest 8th Street. We've had approximately 80 Hispanics to return to Judaism in the last 7 or 8 years. I'm actually more Reformed, but I belong to the synagogue there, in case you hadn't guessed with my purple helmet and stuff like that. I belong to the conservative synagogue on Southwest 8th Street because that sort of, a lot of Hispanics started going to the synagogue about 7 or 8 years ago, and we've had 80 to return since then. And what's hot topic among crypto Jews today is their acceptance as Jews. Generally, they are not accepted halakhically, of course, unless they can prove the total ancestry. That's a hot issue, sometimes bitter issue, of their non-acceptance. There's one woman here who you might have as a speaker sometime, Jeannie Milgram. Have any of you heard her talk? She has an article in volume 4 of the journal, which has come out also. She and her husband are members of Young Israel. They're Orthodox. But she traces her ancestry on her female line 15 generations back, proving every generation back to a little village of Pharisea, which is a little village on the Douro River, which divides Spain and Portugal. She's on the Spanish side, up in sort of north.